Welcome to Nerd Stalker, Episode 10. I'm Adolfo Ferrando, and we're in San Francisco to speak with the founder of Mashable, Pete Cashmore.
We're with Pete Cashmore, founder of
Mashable. Yeah. So how's the company doing?
It's really taking off. It's continuing to grow at a really solid rate, and what we just did in September was we launched a new version of the site, so it's much cleaner, it's much more focused on the content, because one of the things that was holding us back a great deal was that the site was so heavy, it took so long to load, so we focused it back on the content, and we've made it much cleaner, much easier to read, and I just find it a far more pleasant experience now with the new site. We're definitely scaling up on guest authors, so we're having a lot more new voices come in. We had one, I think it was just yesterday, Alex Hillman wrote a post called How to Know When to Fire Your Social Media Consultant, which got a lot of buzz on services like Twitter and all the social media services. So a lot of these guest posts are kind of adding new voices, adding new angles, but we're also negotiating that path a little bit and trying to figure out how we maintain our core, but also bring in new voices, because I think there's a risk as you bring in more and more people that you kind of lose your core, you lose your authoritative voice, you lose your center to some degree.
So Pete, can you talk about your background? How did you get started in this whole thing?
I grew up in Scotland and in a little town, and I really wanted to get into the web space because I thought it was something that could scale. I thought it was something that could be a real breakout for my generation in terms of reaching thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people. And it scales so much better than a real world business, So I was really wanting to get into social networking. I was following things like, and this is when I was about 19, I was following things like MySpace, like Bebo, and I started writing about them because I really wanted to immerse myself in it so that I could understand it. And once I understood it, I wanted to launch a social network, launch a company in this space. So I started writing about it, and that was Mashable. And within a year, Mashable was clearly, as soon as I started getting some interest, within a year it was really a large property. And I thought, look, I'll continue with this because this seems to be catching on, and you can't always assume success, so if something takes off, absolutely go with it. And money was coming in at that point for blogs, which people have been really doubtful about. And then about a year and a half in, I took on our first writer, so I could kind of spread the load, because I've been working 20-hour days, So I was like, okay, I need someone just to help me so I can go to bed a couple hours earlier,
So do you find the Valley and everything, this influence, to be a distraction or noise?
I think there's a level on which it is a distraction. I think there's also a level on which it's massively beneficial to see people face to face and to be conversing with people all the time. It's all around you, and to see people using the technology, you get a very different viewpoint on it. But I think it's always a balance. It's always a case of, and I think a lot of people do this where they fly back and forth to their hometown in the Valley. I think it's a case of balancing it. You need some time where your head's down and where you're getting on with things. And I think being out of the country is advantageous for that, for at least short periods.
So what do you think about European tech companies? We always hear about ourselves here in the Valley and in the Bay Area.
Well, speaking of Europe, I'm actually speaking at a conference called Blogger8 in the Netherlands in October. I'll be speaking about the startup space, but also trying to connect with Europe and learn what's hot in Europe, because last time I was back there, people were talking about things like NetVibes and PageFlix, and now things have moved on dramatically in Europe.
So how do you feel about this whole, I'm going to bring it up, the economy right now? We thought it was a U.S. thing. It seems like, that's a small view. It's turning out to be a global type of thing. Can I get your take on that?
The general consensus is that it really hasn't yet affected tech in a major way. Well, at least this startup valley space. Speaking from personal experience, we haven't noticed a dramatic drop in, say, ad revenue, which is what we survive on, in sponsorship money. We haven't noticed any major change in the income from those streams. Is it going to affect everyone in the economy, including technologists? Yes. Is it creating a certain hesitancy, yes. But I think it's always good to have a bit of a shakeout, to have a bit of a time when people are a little bit scared and they focus on revenue and they focus on building real businesses.
That seems to be sort of the buzz that I'm hearing, is that this sort of brings out the cream of the crop. But then you hear someone like Calacanis saying, you know, we're looking at 50 to 80% of the startups just being gone.
Right, but I mean, how many, isn't it 9 out of 10 companies fail? Not just in tech, but in the wider space of launching a business, you're taking on huge risk. So if it succeeds, be incredibly happy, because even incredibly successful entrepreneurs and even incredibly knowledgeable people launch companies that fail. And the odds are really against you regardless. So, you know, startups failing, I'm not surprised. I think he's probably right on his numbers there. And I think it's also very cyclical. This happens all the time. You have this period of optimism where everyone's bullish and they're pushing ahead, and they're, you know, funding huge funding rounds for companies that don't really make sense to anyone, and they say it's all about the eyeballs. And then we have this period where we say, hang on, let's be bearish, let's hang back, let's figure out what this is really about, how we're going to make money. And right now, I don't think anyone is predicting in the tech space huge, massive collapse of the entire ecosystem.
Where do you think the value will be? What kind of companies do you think?
You know what I think? I think you can launch a good company at any time. So I don't think it'll see a sudden blossoming of a certain type of company. I just think it might see a bit more optimism, a bit more heavily funded startups coming up, and a loss of some of the inhibitions that are kind of affecting us right now. And I think both kind of stages have merit. I think you have a blooming period, and then you have a kind of a heads down period where people are focused on revenue again, and then you have 1,000 startups bloom yet again. So I don't think there's any specific startups that would benefit, but I think it would just be an overall upswing in the number of startups launching and the amount of funding they get.
Let's talk about the Mashable Party. This is an awesome sort of event here. It seems to be a monthly thing that's been happening here. And why are you doing this?
So Mashable Monthlies essentially have the function of bringing out startups. I mean, this one's an exhibitor hall, so we have startups with tables demoing. You know, showing off what startups have got to show, you know, new things they're doing, how they're contributing to the space, you know, allowing people to network in the city, essentially. And also it has, you know, a selfish advantage for us as a brand, which is it reminds people of our brand, it reminds people of what we're about, and it lets us build connections which are really valuable to our business. You know, we survive on those connections, whether it's, you know, stories we're covering or, you know, obviously selling advertising. So I think it, you know, brings out the best of the startups, it allows people to network, and it, you know, obviously has an advantage for us as a brand as well.
Well, thanks so much for doing this and putting this on and being so hands-on. I really appreciate it.
It was great talking to you. Thanks so much, and have a nice night.
Right on. Nice to meet you. Yeah. All right, cool.
And I will be...
We'll edit that one out.
Yeah.